Welcome to the Mind of Business Success podcast. I'm your host, Alicia Cramer. Our guest today is Vince Warnock. He is from Chasing the Insights. We're going to talk about book publishing. I want to welcome you to the show, Vince.
Oh, well, thank you so much for having me, Alicia. It's such an honor to be here.
You have a lot of different things that you do, but we're going to be focusing a little bit more on the publishing side of your business. But for the sake of sort of introducing you to everyone, I would love it if you would share a little bit about all of the different stuff that you've got going on, including your podcast.
Yep.
So that our audience has got a little intel on who is this guy that we're going to be listening to.
Yeah. I was going to say this is going to be a 5-hour episode now. Look, I'm a hyperactive person. I have ADHD, and I love creativity and I love working in creative energy. So I've always been really active in different areas. Even when I've been in corporate, my most recent corporate job, I was the chief marketing officer at Cigna Insurance. But even then, I would always have a side business. I'd always have a side hustle that I'm building. So now that I do this full time, I run a publishing company, which I set up by accident. It was really just to make sure that I had the right kind of talent available whenever I published a book, because it's really hard to find a good developmental editor and proofreader. So when you find them, you're like, oh, I want to keep these people. So made them an offer and said, look, come work for me full time. And then that started the publishing company. But also I'm a marketing coach. I am the host of 2 podcasts now, which is the Chasing the Insights podcast, which is my main one. But also I'm doing a lot of work this year in NFTs, and not the kind of glossy investment side of NFTs you hear in the news and things, but more around how we utilize this technology for us as entrepreneurs to make sure we're connecting with our audience and connecting with our true fans. And in a lot of cases, even kickstarting businesses based on that as well. So I'm doing a lot of work in that. So to do that, I've launched a second podcast called NFT Ninjas with a good friend of mine, Katie Brinkley. And our whole goal is just to educate as many entrepreneurs as possible about this. So all of that, plus of course, writing multiple books and watching lots of Star Wars and Marvel-based stuff on TV and movies and having a lot of fun in there as well.
Love it. So you're very multifaceted.
Very, yes. Yeah. I get bored very quickly. Yeah.
Which is not super uncommon.
Yep.
For a true entrepreneur.
I think I've discovered that most entrepreneurs have ADHD of some description, or at least ADD, where squirrel syndrome and shiny object syndrome seems to kick in every 5 seconds for most entrepreneurs.
One of the things that I love about having conversations with fellow serial entrepreneurs is partially just because it's fun. It's fun to talk about all the different stuff. But it's also refreshing, I think, for those of us who have sort of been the odd ones to connect with kindred spirits. So for those listening who are like, oh, I totally get that. They get it. Other people are like, is that actually productive to be doing all of those things?
Yeah. Oh my goodness. Yeah. Yes, it's productive, but also just operating in creative energy, I think, creates momentum. And every serial entrepreneur knows this anyway. Like the more that you're launching, the more that you're working on, the more it accelerates other areas. But I totally get you, Alicia. Honestly, we had a friend of mine from the UK. She was an entrepreneur over there. Her and her partner were coming to New Zealand, where I'm based. And they were coming over here to see her partner's family. And she said, hey, let's catch up. We'll go out for dinner. And I went, what a great idea. I'll bring my wife, you bring your partner. 4 of us will go out. We'll have a wonderful time. Her and I had a wonderful time. I felt really sorry for my wife and her partner, because as soon as you connect with someone who's a kindred spirit who understands the world that you're in, and if you're not an entrepreneur, it's really hard to understand entrepreneurship. So the moment we sit down talking, we're like, oh my goodness, yes, nonstop 100 mile an hour, comparing notes and going, have you ever had a client do this? Yes. Oh my goodness, crazy. And then we kind of turned around at one point, and my wife loved it. She's a high introvert. She was just like, this is the best dinner ever. I could have just brought a book and sat there and read, and her poor partner's sitting there going, so yeah, lots of fun.
Let's dive into the topic at hand. Now, there have been some conversations on the podcast up to this point about the value of being an author to grow your business, for credibility, as a marketing tool. Not everybody maybe has listened to those episodes. And certainly I think we can go deeper on this subject, because there's sort of this, it's almost like an aspiration that a lot of people have to be an author. But there's also so many misconceptions about becoming an author.
There is.
And I think those misconceptions keep a lot of people from pursuing their dream. And I want to just start by talking about how overcomplicated most people are making this.
Oh my goodness. Well, not just overcomplicated, I think overwhelming. Because if you think about books, for example, writing a book, there's a few things that you have to overcome just from even setting out to write a book for yourself. The first thing that you're going to have to overcome is the fact that we perceive authors as being experts in the industry. And there's a reason for that. So in other words, and this is why having a book or being a published author is of benefit to us as entrepreneurs. We all know this because people look at you as a thought leader. And that kind of, if you think about that, it kind of doesn't make sense, because you're like, well, I've only written a book. I mean, I still have the same thing to say now that I had prior to the book. But if you take a step back, you realize that most people look at that and go, you know what? Writing a book is a lot of work. Like, it is a huge amount of work, and you've got to go through publishers. You've got to go through all these different kinds of things to be able to become a published author. So obviously, to most people, when they look at you and you're a published author, they go, well, you must have something important to say if you've put that amount of work into writing a book, or you've gone through all of those different things to get published. So that kind of makes sense. So when you embark upon writing your first book, you look at that and go, well, actually, am I worthy to write a book? Like, imposter syndrome screams at you. And even if it doesn't, I can guarantee through the book writing process, when you get near the end, and I can speak from experience, and every author I've talked to goes through the same thing, imposter syndrome will scream at you, and it'll go, who do you think you are? What makes you think that you're an author? What makes you think anyone wants to read your book? Trust me, it's a normal process you're going through. And it makes sense too, because you're out of your comfort zone. And that's exactly where you're supposed to be as an entrepreneur, as an author. So you're going to come across this barrier. But then you come across the second thing, which is the fact that everybody perceives writing a book as a lot of work. And it is. And if you're writing a solo book, so you're writing your memoir, you're writing a science fiction book. One day I'm going to finish a science fiction book. I've got this book in my head, but I cannot justify putting the effort into writing that book at the moment, because I've got so many other things I'm building. It's really frustrating. But anyway, but to put that kind of effort into writing a book is a lot of work. But what entrepreneurs miss is that there are many different ways that you can become an author. You don't necessarily have to have a solo book. There are what we call repurposed books. There are collaboration books. There are low content books. There are so many different ways that you can become a published author, and you can kind of bring this to life. So you have to overcome all those obstacles, the imposter syndrome, which is going to scream at you, that overwhelm that kicks in, and you're like, oh my goodness, or even the lack of understanding about publishing, because a lot of entrepreneurs think that you have to go through a traditional publisher. And for my first book, when I was writing Chasing the Insights, I had publishers I was negotiating with at the time. And fortunately, both of those publishers were very open and honest with me and said, look, when you publish through a traditional publisher, we just want you to know you don't control the narrative of your book. And they were very clear with me that once I've finished writing my book, I will submit it to them. They will come back and basically get me to rewrite it in the way that they want it written, because they're the experts. Now, my challenge with that is I was very adamant that my first book had to feel like you were sitting in a living room somewhere, having a single malt scotch on the couch, listening to me prattle on about, what I've experienced through my years and things. It had to feel like I was talking directly to you. And that doesn't sit well with most publishing companies. So for me, that didn't sit right. So I had to learn the other aspects of publishing, which is self-publishing or indie publishing or shell publishing, or the different ways that you can become an author there. And because most people don't understand that, the thought of going through that publishing process is quite overwhelming as well. It's like, well, I don't know enough about this. Even if you wanted to self-publish, understanding what categories you have to be in, what's an ISBN number, how do you get these kind of things, what platforms should you be on, all those kind of things is a lot to have to process.
I really enjoy this conversation. I can speak from personal experience because I have 2 solo books. I've contributed to 2 co-authored books.
Yeah.
And I remember when I decided to do my first book, I knew I was going to self-publish. I knew it was going to be a marketing tool. I also knew that I wanted to have the luxury of doing it my own way.
Yeah.
Now for me, when I did that one, part of it was super easy for me to write. And part of it, I actually delegated off and had research done by a ghostwriter that I then kind of polished up, because that book was very, very, covering some very technical things. So that's my book, Hypnosis for Success. Yeah. Well, I understand a lot about hypnosis, how to do hypnosis, how to teach people how to do self-hypnosis.
Yeah.
But when it comes to the history of it, I was like, that just doesn't really interest me. But my vision was to dispel all of the common myths and misconceptions about hypnosis, which then meant, a little bit of backstory. With my second book, I knew I wanted to self-publish that one as well. That one was just a moment of inspiration. I literally sat down and I banged out that book in, I think, 2 days.
Wow.
Yeah. And I had 2 colleagues, one a client who is also an author, who I helped teach how to self-publish his book and get over his imposter syndrome, and a colleague who is a publisher of a magazine. I asked them to contribute chapters to that book to just help round it out a little bit.
Yeah.
Now, these things are somewhat unconventional in some respects, but that's what you're talking about here, is it doesn't always have to follow the model. You can find what works for you.
Oh, 100%. In fact, it's one of the first things I had to learn when writing my first book, was that there are actually no rules. And this sounds crazy, but I got told that when you're writing your first book, or when you're writing any book, in fact, you should do a draft from start to finish. So everyone told me, this is how you do it. This is the most successful way to write a book. Start at the beginning and just keep writing till you get to the end. Don't edit it. Don't reread it. Don't do anything. And then at the end, you can give it to an editor. They'll come back and give you all their recommendations and you can rewrite it. Now, the problem with that is I discovered very early on that I would write a chapter. And if I had a very stressful job at the time. I was writing it while I was the chief marketing officer at a Fortune 100 company at Cigna Insurance, which requires a lot of energy, a lot of focus, and a lot of stress and anxiety. So when you're writing a book, I discovered my first chapter was very much in my personality. It was stupid dad jokes. It was really lame humor. It was just my way of talking and all this. So I kind of written that like that. When I got to the second chapter, I was under a lot of pressure. So I started writing and it became very dry. And the humor was removed from there. It was very fact-based, very case study-based. It almost felt like they were reading 2 different books. And I realized this early on. So I actually started a different kind of process and broke all the rules. I thought, I'm going to write a chapter. But before I write that chapter, I'm going to read the chapters before it so that I'm in the same mindset. So I'm in the same kind of mentality and the same kind of tonality as my previous chapters. But of course, when you're doing that, as you're going through and reading those previous chapters, I'm like highlighting them going, well, there's obviously an error there, or that can be rewritten, that bit doesn't work, etc. So I was writing, editing, and doing everything all at the same time. So that broke all the conventions that I had been told. And I felt a little bit guilty about that. I didn't want to tell people about that because, there was a proper way to publish a book. But then I came across a good friend of mine who, her whole journey has been absolutely crazy. And she wanted to document that and put it into a book. And she just went, she's so focused. She was like, I don't care what anyone says. Here's how I'm going to write it. I've got 13 topics I want to talk about. So I'm going to write 13 different chapters. And I'm just going to write them as separate chapters. And at the end, I'm going to go, eeny, meeny, miny, mo, what order should I put them in? And I'm going, wait, you're not starting with an overall structure? You're not starting with an overall through narrative that's going to happen here? She broke all of the rules, even down to everyone says write half an hour a day. And she's like, I don't have half an hour a day. I've got 8 minutes a day. I'm going to write for 8 minutes every day. And she banged that book out. And I tell you now, it went to #1 bestseller almost instantly because it connected with so many different people. And that made me realize there are no rules. Honestly, most of the rules are just people telling you that's how they did it. And it may or may not have worked for them. But the reality is you get to decide. It's your book. You get to decide what tone it's in. You get to decide what length it is. You get to decide who else contributes to it, how much imagery you've got in there, all of those kind of things. That's all completely up to you. Basically, just write the book that you want to read.
I love that. So good. And there's so much wisdom in that. And it's true in life and in business.
Yeah.
I mean, I have to do an occasional reassessment of everything that I'm doing in my business because people get in my head. This guru
same.
and that guru, and this person says this and that person says that.
Yeah.
And it just, at some point you lose yourself.
Yeah.
And
Yep.
I think this is the prime example of just, it's just opinions.
Yeah.
Right? It's just other people's opinions. And why are you doing it to begin with?
Yeah, I love that. Honestly, I've had to say, I actually fired a coach for that very reason, because I do a lot of work for free. I do free strategy calls with anyone that needs it. I do a lot of masterclasses in my Facebook group that, according to one of my coaches, was giving away far too much. I did one on PR one time. And they were like, do you realize, Vince, that wasn't a masterclass. That was an entire series that you could be selling to people. That was a blah, 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 and all this, and lecturing me on it. And I turned around and said, well, hang on, two things. Number one, I don't want to be known for PR. I do PR because that's part of my business and part of the experience that I have in the 30 plus years I've been doing marketing. But that's not my area of expertise. I'm not going to go out there and tell people I'm a PR expert and they should hire me for their PR. But I will empower them and teach them what they should know. And I guarantee you at that point, they're going to come back to me and go, wow, now that I know all that, guess what? I don't want to do it because it sucks. Can you point me in the right direction? So I connect them with proper PR people. So, but the other thing I also realized is I'm a firm believer in sowing and reaping and karma, whatever you want to call it. But when you do good for people, when you genuinely want to help other people and your focus is on that, not focus on doing it for a return, but your focus is, I actually genuinely want to impact others. I'm telling you now, money, clients, anything that is a goal of yours comes really easily because you're not focused or fixated on closing a deal or focused or fixating on getting a certain amount of money in your bank account. You're actually focused on impacting others and it all comes back to you. So yeah, I actually got rid of that coach. They got in my head. I started thinking I was giving away too much for free. And I went, you know what, screw it. You know what I'm going to do? A, I'm going to fire them. And then B, I'm going to give away more for free just to spite them. So I gave away my entire first book and just went, that's it. I'm putting that out there. Anyone who wants a copy, raise your hand. I'll send you a copy and just put it out there for free. And they were like, no.
So for someone who's listening who wants to write a book,
yeah,
they don't want to figure it all out.
No.
Let's talk a little bit about what you do in your business, giving people sort of this frame of reference that you don't have to figure it all out. You can get support with these things.
Absolutely. And it's probably actually the biggest thing I do is support. That's probably the best way to put it. I mean, we've got a team here who do things like the editing, they do the developmental editing. So looking at your writing from a structure perspective and going, does this make sense? Like, is there anything in here where when I read that, it's quite jarring or it sticks out to me? So they'll give you some feedback on that. I've got proofreaders who'll go through and make sure you don't make lots and lots of spelling mistakes. Although I will say this about that. There's a very prominent author who's actually one of my favorite authors of all time. I've read every one of his books. He's going to be on my podcast coming up in probably a few months' time. But I remember talking to him about my favorite marketing book ever called Contagious. And I said to him, it was fantastic. And I said, oh man, when I put my first book out there, I was so embarrassed when someone came back and said there's a spelling mistake. And he goes, oh, Vince, I went through 14 different editors. 14 proofreaders and all these people coming back and finding all these little grammatical and spelling errors. And still, when I put my book out there are errors in it. I was like, I feel so much better now. So don't stress about that kind of stuff. So we take care of that. We do the formatting of the book, cover design, work with you, all those kind of things. But the main thing that we do is actually support you through the process, because there's certain challenges you face when you're writing a book or writing a chapter in a collaboration book, etc. One of them is knowing where you're heading, and we can help give you frameworks for that. But again, you get to decide what to write. And usually the way I do this, my best advice I give everyone is start from a position of going, when someone's finished reading my chapter or reading my book or reading whatever it is I've written, what do I want them to think? What do I want them to feel? And what do I want them to do? If you can cover off the think, feel, do aspect, then the writing structure itself usually comes quite naturally. But then the other thing that's going to kick in is you'll be talking about, I don't know, if you're talking about podcasting, for example, and then all of a sudden you're like, wait, they must know what type of microphone they have to get. I'm going to write a new chapter now on microphone types. And it just completely deviates from where you're actually heading with the book itself. Like, we just keep adding things in and adding things in instead of going, let's keep focused on the value that I'm going to add to the reader. So those are the kind of things I usually help people with, usually around encouragement. The amount of people that hit what some people call writer's block, but it's just basically the busyness of life, and getting them back on track, getting them focused on that, and then just encouraging them through the editing process as well. So do a lot of work around that. In some cases, it's actually working with them to make them realize that a solo book may not be right for them just now. So collaboration books, for example, or co-authored books, are a really good way for people to enter into being a published author, especially if they're in a book with a bunch of really talented other entrepreneurs. Then it can actually elevate your brand quite consistently. We do a lot of work in that space. But also for a lot of people, they think that they have to write this, huge masterpiece of a book, 50,000 words. And I'm like, well, actually the topic you've got, you only need to write about 20,000 or 30,000 words, or actually it could be a low content book. I put one out called 5-word affirmations. And it literally was just outlining the journey I went to understand the importance of affirmations. I used to go, why would I bother with that kind of rubbish? I don't have time for affirmations. That's just self-talk, blah, blah, blah. And someone challenged me on it one day and said, you're all about experimentation, Vince, but you've made up your mind on affirmations without actually having tried it. And I was like, ooh, touche. So I said, all right, I'm going to do this 30 days of affirmations. That was my goal. I'm going to write down a pile of affirmations that work for me. I'm going to declare them over my life every day for 30 days. And I'm going to experiment with those. I'm going to journal how I'm feeling, what that does to my mindset, all that kind of stuff. And in that 30 days, I'm also going to research the neuroscience behind it, because I love neuromarketing and neuroscience. That 30 days turned into over 2 years, and I'm still doing daily affirmations. The power of them blew my mind. I didn't realize how much neuroscience was involved. So I wrote a book about that. And the book itself is probably about 30 or 40 pages of writing. It's not much at all. It's just going into the background about cognitive dissonance, understanding cognitive bias, and how these things can actually help our brain when we do daily affirmations. The rest of the book was because I discovered that most of the affirmations I was using every day were really short, probably to do with my ADHD, if anything. There's no scientific reason. There's no benefit from doing short affirmations, but for some reason, these really resonated with me. So the book itself is like 180 different daily affirmations. They're just 5-word affirmations. So each page is just a different affirmation of 5 words. It's incredibly easy to write a book, a full-length book, when every page just has 5 words on it. It's so simple. So actually teaching people that there are different ways that you can bring this book to life. I even had one podcaster who was going, I really want to write a book, and I want to write it based on all the wisdom I've learned in interviewing all these people. And I went, okay, well, what's the question that you ask everybody at the end? And they went, it's around, advice they've got for this. And I said, so you literally have over 100 different people on your show that have given you this advice. You can transcribe that, and you've got a book that has advice from 100 entrepreneurs. And they were like, oh my goodness, it's right in front of me. I said, and the beauty of this is you write the intro, you write the outro, you write why you did this in the acknowledgements. The rest of that you can outsource to a VA who can transcribe all of that for you and format it for you and put it into a book. So it's working with them to understand the different ways that they can bring their book to life and to keep them on track with the writing as well.
So good. So good. We're planting seeds in minds here.
Yeah. I hope we are. Honestly, I one of the reasons that I'm so kind of passionate about publishing and book authoring is not only because of my own experience. So when I was at primary school, which is in New Zealand, that's aged 5 to 10. So when I was at primary school, I had a teacher there, and I was at a terrible school. It was a really poor school. We grew up in a really low socioeconomic environment, in a really abusive household. And at school, one of the teachers there was trying to analyze my handwriting one day because I knew all the rules around handwriting. I knew that capitals go at the beginning of a sentence, that you put it at the beginning of a noun. I knew all of these rules. But when I wrote, all the rules went out of my head. As in, I would write, and if I wrote the word connected, for example, some of the ends would be capitals, some of them would be lowercase. It made no logical sense. So they were trying to analyze this, and their big kind of conclusion to it was, oh, Vince, you're just retarded. And when I was at school, and that's back in the 70s, that was apparently acceptable. That had a huge impact on me, and a huge negative impact on me. So there was part of me, that rebel part of me, that always wanted to become an author just to spite that stupid teacher. And by the way, we found out what the issue was. It wasn't until I got to a transitional school called Intermediate, when I was age 11, and one of the teachers there just went, oh, I've seen this before. I know exactly what it is. You're not retarded. You're intelligent. All it is your brain's going too fast. Your hand can't keep up. And your brain's already processing paragraphs further down and that you're going to write. So therefore it's going capital N, capital N, Vince, put a capital T. So that's what it actually was. But also I ended up working in an environment with an angry little Canadian woman who had written 2 books. And she said to me one day, she was really annoyed about the fact that in the industry that I was in, I was teaching a lot of universities and tertiary institutions and technical institutions how to do digital marketing. So I would travel around all these universities and teach them how to kind of connect with their students, etc. And there was a huge demand for that. So every time we had a leaders meeting, they would be like, oh, Vince is going on the road again. He's got to do a workshop, and they wanted to speak at this conference and that conference. And she got really jealous one day, and she just kind of lost it and said, oh, all I hear is Vince, Vince, Vince. Why is it he gets to go to these things and not me? He's not an author. He wouldn't make an author's a-hole. And I was like, A, I'm right here. And then B, challenge accepted. So my first book, now she's back in Canada, but my first book, I will neither confirm nor deny that I sent a copy of that book to her, signed from, by the way, the author's a-hole. But that competitive kind of spirit is kind of why I kind of got into that, and the thing for me, though, is the satisfaction in holding that book in your hand. And this is the thing I learned having a publishing company. Every time one of my clients has published a book and they're on Zoom with you and they're holding that book in their hand and they're looking at you with the biggest, cheesiest smile and that sense of accomplishment, to me, that is incredibly fulfilling. So I really hope we're planting that seed. I really hope every single one of you listening to this right now goes, you know what? I've got a book in me, because I'll tell you, first of all, there is a book in you. I know that for a fact, because every one of you have something to share. But secondly, because your story is actually important. And a lot of us kind of belittle our story or think that my journey, my story is not that important or it's not that significant. I can tell you now, there are people out there that their path to success is in hearing your story, because it's going to resonate with them. It's a journey that they're on, similar to yourself. And they want to know that somebody else has broken through that. They want to know that somebody else like them has actually made that leap to success. So your story is super important. So yes, definitely hope we're planting those seeds. Please, all of you, write a book.
So good. So good. I have to just say real quick, I was interviewed on someone else's podcast last week. Yeah. And one of the questions that came up was about the books that I'd written. And I shared a story that I'd never shared before. And so it's so funny that you're sharing your story about this woman that pissed you off and how it sort of ignited within you that motivation to just get it done.
Yeah.
Well, with my first book, Hypnosis for Success, I was playing around with the idea of the book and dragging my feet, the same stuff that everybody here that's been talking about, thinking about it, all the excuses. And I remember getting an email from someone who had sort of this like snarky, condescending tone about some of the background music that I was using in my hypnosis audios, and how he was this and that and blah, blah, blah. And, I remember that was the moment I decided to write my book. I got so pissed off. I was like, fuck you. You don't know me. And, I had my brick and mortar hypnotherapy practice. I was
Yeah.
answering the same questions, the same common myths and misconceptions over and over and over again. And I said, that's it. And that is what inspired me to actually get out of my own way and just
Yeah.
get it done. Just do
I
it.
love that. You and I are wired way too similarly, honestly. I still remember being on a call with someone one time, and he was just, he was so arrogant. And I won't name him because he's actually quite a prominent marketer, digital marketer. But him and I never agree on most things. Like, we have a very different approach. I'm very based on ethical marketing. I'm very based on making sure we're not manipulating or misleading people. He's all about the dollar bills. And we were on a call together one time, and he just lost it. And he's like, Vince, like, how many times have I told you, charge as much as possible up front? You got to do this, you got to do that. And I was like, dude, we're never going to agree on this. Okay. We have completely different philosophies. But he turned around and said, and that's why I'm successful and you never will be. And honestly, the competitiveness in me, and this is really childish behavior. I'm not proud of this, but part of me also was really satisfied with doing this. I turned around and said, I said, my apologies. I forgot. That's right. Because you were listed by Adobe as one of the top 50 marketers in the world. Oh, no, wait, that wasn't you. Awkward. That was me. Oh, embarrassing. You weren't on the stage. That's right. It was me, Seth Godin, Brian Solis, Anne Handley. Where were you? I don't know what happened there. He just looked at me and goes, you dick. I was like, yes. So the childishness in me does come out every now and then. I'm not proud of that, but it was a lot of fun as well. So.
Well, it just goes to show we can be imperfect,
Yep.
perfectly human, and allow those triggered moments to motivate you to get out of your own way. And so we just planted some more seeds.
Yeah, we did. And we're watering those seeds as well. So we'll see some shoots sprouting through very soon.
Well, there's probably a lot more that we could talk about on this topic. But since we don't have time, I want to make sure that our listeners are able to connect with you, because I do think that this is something that is going to resonate with people, and they recognize, you know what, I probably am not going to figure this out on my own. I want the support. I'm not an editor. I don't want to find one, coach me through this. So how can our listeners connect with you?
I make it super hard for them, Alicia. No, actually, I make it really easy. Just go to chasingtheinsights.com. That's the home of everything for me. That's the home of my podcast. You'll see a link there to become an author, but you'll also see a link there to free strategy call. And if you're thinking about the fact that there may be a book in you, or you're thinking you really want to become an author, just book some time with me. It's no obligation. You get 30 minutes of my time. At the end of that, I will give you the clarity that you need. I'll give you a roadmap that you need, and we will work out what the best pathway for you is. And if that's working with us, then fantastic, because you're all in Alicia's community. I'll do you a good deal, of course. But if not, I can pass you and connect you with the right people as well. So yes, definitely. And also, you'll see links on there to everywhere you can connect with me on social. I love meeting new people. So seriously, come and connect with me. Unless, of course, you're a spammer. If you're a spammer, don't bother. I get really annoyed with spam. But if you're someone who genuinely wants to connect, you'll see all the links there to reach out to me.
Well, I have a feeling the spammers probably haven't stuck with us to the end.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I doubt very much you would have spammers in your audience, Alicia. Definitely.
We've got some amazing people on our audience because we have such amazing guests. So I want to thank you so much for being with us today, Vince.
Thank you so much for having me, Alicia. Honestly, I mean, anytime you and I catch up is a lot of fun anyway. So selfishly, look, I know all of you got value out of this, and we're planting those seeds with you, but really this is just a chance for us to catch up and hang out.
That's right. Yeah.
But also, it is just an honor to be on your show, and an honor to be in front of your audience as well. I don't take that lightly in the slightest.
Well, I love sharing guests like you. And of course, I love everyone that's listening. And if you haven't already subscribed, make sure you do so. We will see you in another episode.